You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The Egg That Would Not Stay Gone. It was the kind of wet afternoon that makes New York look as if it has been left out overnight and collected in the morning by a careless servant. Rain had stopped pretending to fall and had settled into a fine, persistent drizzle, enough to glaze the pavement, darken the brick fronts, and give every taxi on West 35th Street the air of an irritated beetle. From the front room of Nero Wolfe's old brownstone, the city looked blurred and damp and faintly disreputable, which was unfair to the city but not inaccurate. Inside, civilization was making a stand. The office had its usual order and comfort. The yellow walls, the crowded bookshelves, the red leather chairs, Wolfe's immense desk planted like a continental shelf, and the big globe lamp casting a mellow light that made the room seem detached from weather, traffic, politics, and the rest of mankind's errors. Wolfe was in his chair behind the desk, all 7 large and deliberate stone of him arranged with exact economy, one hand supporting a book and the other resting near a pile of correspondence to which he had not yet consented to attend. His lips were compressed in the expression that meant he had accepted the existence of the universe for another hour, but reserved the right to complain later. I was where I usually am in the late afternoon, at my desk, trying to reduce a stack of notes into something legible, and wondering whether Fritz intended a rabbit, a duck, or a surprise for dinner. In that house, a surprise from Fritz was usually superior to a plan from anyone else. The doorbell rang. Wolfe's eyes came up from the book. They moved toward me, which was instruction enough. I crossed the hall, opened the front door, and found a man on the stoop who looked as though he had climbed it under pressure from forces he didn't trust. He was in his middle 40s, spare without being thin, with narrow shoulders and the careful clothes of a man who spends money not for pleasure, but for reassurance. His dark overcoat was a good one and damp at the seams. Under one arm he carried a flat leather case. His hat was grey, his gloves dark tan, and his face one of those faces that seem ordinary until you notice that the eyes are 2 alert, pale grey eyes, quick and doubtful, moving from me to the hall behind me as if checking whether there might be a second line of defense. "Yes," I said. "My name is Julius Tappan. I telephoned at noon. I was told Mr. Wolfe might see me at 4:15. You were told correctly. Come in and dry your anxieties in the hall." He stepped in, removed his hat, and gave his coat to me with the hesitation of a man surrendering evidence. When I led him to the office, he paused on the threshold for half a second, as many of them do. Wolfe's office can do that to a newcomer. It is not merely a room. It is a setting arranged to suggest that nonsense will be noticed and penalized. Wolfe did not rise. He never rises for clients. He looked at Tappan, then at the leather case, then back at Tappan. "Sit down, Mr. Tappan." Tappan sat in the red leather chair opposite the desk, but with only partial commitment. If you had told me he had kept one muscle prepared for springing to his feet, I would have believed it. Wolfe said, "This is Archie Goodwin. You may speak in front of him. Indeed, you must. I do not care to hear things twice." Tappan nodded. He swallowed. Then he laid the leather case on his knees, opened it, and took out an object wrapped in white tissue paper. He placed it on the desk with care bordering on ceremony, unfolded the tissue, and revealed a painted wooden egg. He might as well have deposited a ruby idol or a sacred relic. He had that much solemnity in him. The thing was about 3 inches high, perhaps a little more, and shaped with enough precision to sit well in the hand. Its surface had been painted in bands of folk patterns, scarlet tulips, dark blue leaves, black circles pricked with white, and at the narrower end a fan of gold strokes, worn a little as though by thumb and forefinger over the years. It was no mere toy, though it might once have lain in a child's palm. It was not expensive, unless rarity had promoted it. It had personality, which is another way of saying that it suggested a history and would not give it up freely. Tappan said, "That is why I am here." Wolfe lowered his eyes to it. He did not touch it. "Is it dangerous?" Tappan blinked. "Dangerous." explosive, poisoned, contaminated, cursed by a monk, or invested with legal title to an oil field. Number. Then at first glance, it appears to be a painted wooden egg. Yes, Tappan said, and his fingers closed on the arms of the chair. Yes, of course, if it were only that I should not have troubled you, Wolf grunted. Trouble is what clients bring me in lieu of entertainment. Explain. Tappan drew in a breath and let it out with an effort that suggested he had rehearsed the speech, but had not approved of it. I collect American folk art, primitive carvings, painted boxes, fracture, weather vanes, toys, domestic oddities, ceremonial pieces, mostly Pennsylvania Dutch, and New England work, but not exclusively. I buy at auctions, from dealers, and sometimes directly from families. I have been collecting for 17 years. Wolf nodded. A regrettable, but lawful hobby. Tappan almost smiled, but nerves beat it back. 3 months ago, at a country sale in Dutchess County, I bought a lot of miscellaneous objects from an estate, 6 pieces, a painted blanket chest, 2 carved birds, a set of tin cookie cutters, a small wall box, and this egg. The auctioneer knew nothing about it, or said he knew nothing. The catalogue merely called it painted wooden object, possibly ceremonial. I bought the lot for the chest, and later found yourself attached to the egg, I said. He turned to me sharply. Number, quite the reverse. That made it better. He leaned forward. I took the pieces home to my apartment. I live alone. I catalogued them. The egg seemed of no importance, though it interested me a little because of the paint and because it appeared older than the others. I put it in the top right drawer of a bureau in my bedroom, intending to look into it later. Wolf's eyes narrowed by a degree. And 3 days later, I left for Albany on business, and to inspect another sale before leaving. I emptied that drawer because I intended to have the bureau moved to make room for a rug chest I had purchased. I am certain I emptied it. I packed several objects, including the egg, into a carton which I took to a storage room in the basement of the building. I locked the storage room. Then I traveled to Albany. He stopped. He looked from Wolf to me, as though expecting one of us to laugh and wanting it over with. Neither of us obliged. When I returned the next night, he said, the egg was in the drawer again. I said, you fetched it from storage and forgot it. Number, you thought you packed it and didn't. Number, you own 2 eggs. Number, he took a quick breath, steadying himself. Mr. Goodwin, I know how it sounds. I am not superstitious. I am not fanciful. I drink moderately. I sleep well, or did until recently. I tell you that I placed the egg in the carton, carried the carton to the basement, locked the room, and was absent from my apartment for more than 24 hours. When I came back, the carton was still in the locked storage room. The egg was not inside it. It was in the top right drawer of my bedroom bureau. Wolf moved his gaze from Tappan to the egg. What did you do? I stood and stared at it for a full minute like a fool. Then I examined the drawer, the bureau, the room, and the apartment. Nothing was disturbed. I went to the basement. The lock on the storage room was intact. The carton was where I had left it. And then I put the egg into a valise and took it with me to Philadelphia the next day. I attended an auction there and stayed 2 nights at a hotel. On the train back, I opened the valise to reassure myself. It was still there. It was. I returned to my apartment, put the valise on a chair, changed my clothes, and then remembered that I had forgotten to telephone a dealer. I went to the bedroom for a memorandum pad, opened the bureau drawer, and the egg was in it. I let out a little breath through my nose, not because I believed him, but because he told it cleanly and with the right amount of disgust. Wolf said, and the valise. The egg was gone from it. Locked. Yes. Who has access to your apartment? No one unless I admit them. The building has a doorman and elevator operator. My maid comes in the mornings, but not when I am away overnight, unless arranged. No relatives, no intimate friends, certainly no one with a key. I made a note and asked, how many times? He looked at me. 5. That improved it again. Each time, he said, I removed it deliberately. Once to the basement storage room, once to Philadelphia, once to a dealer's shop on Madison Avenue, where I left it in a parcel with several books. Once to my office downtown, locked in the lower drawer of my desk, and once, in desperation, to the apartment of a friend in Riverdale. I did not tell my friend what it was. I merely asked him to keep a wrapped object for me. The next morning, before I had telephoned him, the egg was in the bureau drawer again. I said, "What did your friend report?" He said the package was still on the table in his front room. When he opened it while I was on the telephone, the object was gone. Silence held for a moment. Rain ticked faintly at the windows. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard sounded under Fritz's weight. Wolf said, "Either you are lying insane, or the victim of an ingenious and persistent practical joke. I reject miracles out of professional self-respect. I don't ask you to accept a miracle. I ask you to explain a trick." Wolf's lips moved. It was not a smile, but the possibility of one being denied existence. "Do you fear the object?" Tappan hesitated. "I dislike it." That was not my question. He looked down at the egg and then away from it. "Yes." That was honest, and because it was honest, it counted. Wolf asked, "Why did you not go to the police?" Because I should have sounded ridiculous, also because no crime had occurred. "No crime?" Wolf's brows rose. "If your account is true, someone has entered your apartment or manipulated your possessions repeatedly and with considerable skill. That is a nuisance at minimum. Nuisance is a branch of crime." Tappan spread his hands. "Then I stand corrected. A crime, if you insist. But I did not want policemen tramping through my collection and grinning at me. That, at least, was human. Collectors are often more willing to lose sleep than dignity." Wolf leaned back, a fraction of an inch. "Why come to me today?" Tappan's answer came at once. "Because this morning a man telephoned me and asked whether I still had the painted egg from the Beecham estate sale. He would not give his name. He said only that if I valued my safety, I should stop carrying it about and leave it where it belongs." I stopped writing. Wolf's eyes sharpened. Indeed, what precisely were his words? Tappan repeated them, almost verbatim, which impressed me. Nervous men often remember the exact wording of a threat better than they remember their own birthdays. The caller had used an ordinary male voice, neither rough nor educated enough to stand out. He had rung off before Tappan could ask a question. Wolf said, "Now we begin to approach matter. This anonymous person believes the egg belongs in your bureau drawer. That suggests intent, not enchantment, Archie." "Yes, sir." "Begging where all honest mysteries start, with the furniture." Tappan looked from him to me. "The furniture." Wolf nodded toward the egg. "A returning object is less likely to travel than to be replaced. If a painted wooden trifle insists on reappearing in a particular drawer, then the drawer may be more interesting than the trifle. Mr. Tappan, you will give Archie your address, your office address, the name of your Riverdale friend, the dealer on Madison Avenue, and complete access to the bedroom bureau. Also the history of the estate sale." He put a fingertip to the tissue paper and nudged it, not touching the egg itself. "I distrust collectors, miracles, and anonymous telephones. But I distrust coincidence most of all. Take that thing away. Its colors are impertinent." Tappan exhaled. The first full breath he had taken since entering. "Then you will accept the case?" Wolf closed his book. That was the formal sign. "For the present, my fee will depend on whether the explanation is merely tedious or offensively elaborate. Archie will accompany you now." I rose. Tappan gathered the egg in its tissue and returned it to the leather case as if he hoped the wrapping might restrain its habits. When we got to the hall, he put on his coat with hands, not entirely steady. As I took my hat from the rack, I glanced back through the office door. Wolf had already opened his book again, but I knew that meant nothing. Under the heavy lids, his mind would be chewing at the facts like a mastiff with a bone. A painted egg that would not stay where it was put, a collector with nerves, a threatening telephone call, and a bureau drawer singled out for repeated return, on a wet afternoon in New York. That was enough to get me into my overcoat and out the door fast. In our business, Furniture had often been more dangerous than people. Furniture stayed put and held secrets. And if Wolf was right, the top right drawer in Julius Tappan's bedroom bureau was about to earn its reputation. Chapter 2. Archie and the bureau drawer by 5:15. I was in a taxi headed uptown through a rain that had stopped falling and had taken to hovering. New York can do that in April. The moisture hangs in the air with a private grudge and settles on your hat brim, your cuffs, and your disposition. Julius Tappan sat opposite me with his leather case across his knees, and his eyes on it, as if he expected the painted egg to climb out and demand a transfer. A client riding along to watch me inspect his own bedroom furniture is not my idea of a balanced arrangement, but I let it stand. He had the look of a man whose nerves had been sharpened and then left out in the wet. If I had sent him home alone, he would probably have spent the evening opening drawers 1 inch at a time and listening for a whisper. He lived in the East 60s in a narrow townhouse that had been improved by money and then disciplined by taste. The front door opened on a hall paneled in dark wood, with a runner on the floor that had enough age to be honorable and enough care to be expensive. There were umbrella stands, a tall clock, 2 small framed folk drawings, and the smell of good polish. It was not a house that tolerated carelessness. It looked as though each object had been warned in advance to behave. The servant who admitted us had the dry composure of a man who has spent years protecting order from the habits of the people who pay for it. Tappan introduced him as Bino. "He has been with me 11 years, Tappan said. Bino inclined his head. "Good evening, sir." If I had told him I was there to investigate the repeated reappearance of a wooden egg, he might have blinked once, or not. Men like Bino consider astonishment a private indulgence and rarely spend it on duty. Tappan led me upstairs to his rooms on the 2nd floor. The bedroom was large, dignified, and somewhat over-arranged, like a committee chairman who has developed a taste for primitive Americana. The bed was broad, the curtains heavy, the rugs good, and the furniture dark and substantial. There were carved birds on brackets, a painted wall box, and 2 framed fracture pieces whose tulips marched around their lettering as if it were part of a sermon. Against the far wall stood the bureau. "There," Tappan said, and pointed to it in the tone of a witness identifying the dock where the body had floated in. It was walnut, middle 19th century, broad, shouldered, and not pretending to elegance. Furniture like that is built for 2 purposes, endurance and secrecy. Generations put things into it that they don't want lying around loose. Tappan crossed to it and pulled open the top right drawer. It was empty. That disappointed him. He had probably hoped to find the egg sitting there in cheerful defiance of common sense. I was glad it wasn't. Even if I had believed in the supernatural, I would have objected to the egg's manner. "May I?" I asked. He stood aside. I began with the drawer itself. A bureau drawer is like a witness with no imagination. It does not invent, but it remembers pressure. The interior smelled faintly of cedar and starch, and some older, dry odor that belonged to linen long removed. The bottom had the expected scratches, and near the back left corner, a little patch where varnish had been worn by a box or a bottle that had once lived there. More interesting was the front edge, inside the lip, where fingers naturally go to slide it open. The finish there was lighter than on the corresponding edges of the other drawers. Not by much, but enough. The runners also showed more use, smoother and cleaner from repeated travel. I checked the drawer to the left, less wear, the one below, less again. "How often did you use this one before all this began?" I asked. Tappan frowned, thinking honestly, which I appreciated. "Not often, once or twice a week perhaps. I kept small things in it, collar studs, old receipts, a watch key that belonged to my grandfather, odds and ends. And since the egg developed homing instincts, I open it constantly." Understandable. A drawer that starts taking initiative deserves supervision. He did not smile. He was too tired. I lifted the drawer free and set it on the bed. Then I examined the cavity. The interior was plain enough. No false bottom, no spring panel, no wire or latch. I rapped on the back and sides, pressed along the underside of the top, and ran my fingers along the joints. Nothing, That did not disappoint me. Hidden compartments are less common in real furniture than in melodrama, though they turn up often enough to keep a detective from becoming lazy. The bureau had a little brass lock for each of the top drawers, but the keyholes were ornamental by now. The locks had long since ceased to matter. I tested one and got the confirmation. It would turn if the key were there, but the bolt had too much play. A patient child with a hairpin could have opened it during the Garfield administration. Do you ever lock these drawers? Number, there seemed no need. There is usually no need until there is. I got down on one knee and studied the floor under the bureau. No drag marks, recent enough to matter. A folded scrap of paper had drifted there and settled in dust. I retrieved it. It proved to be the corner of an auction catalogue page. Tappan said it had probably been there for weeks. I believed him. Next came the room itself. The windows were latched and fitted tightly enough to discourage a burglar with self-respect. The door to the hall closed squarely. The dressing room beyond contained wardrobes, a cheval mirror, and shelves crowded with shirts arranged as if by military order. A bathroom connected at the rear. No hidden passages, no trapdoors, no panels that slid away to reveal monks or vaudeville magicians. Bino had followed us up and stood near the doorway with his hands folded. I turned to him. You attend this floor? Yes, sir. In the mornings I bring hot water if it is wanted, and later straighten up when Mrs. Vale is not here. Mr. Tappan prefers the placement of his things to remain undisturbed. That was delicately said. It translated as, the boss is fussy. Have you ever seen the wooden egg in this drawer? Yes, sir. How often? I could not say precisely, several times. Did you ever put it there yourself? No, sir. Did Mrs. Vale? I would not know, but I think it unlikely. That was Bino offering an opinion without insolence. He was good. I had Mrs. Vale brought up. She was a compact widow in her 50s, with strong hands and an expression that suggested life had made several attempts on her patience and had not succeeded. She looked at me, then at Tappan, then at Bino, and understood at once that something absurd had become expensive. No, sir, she said when I asked whether she had moved the egg. I dusted around it once or twice, but I never touched it unless Mr. Tappan told me to hand it to him. I do not meddle with articles. Articles had all the disdain in the world for collectibles. You have a key to the house? No, so Mr. Bino lets me in. Anyone else? Not to my knowledge. I asked for a list of every person who had entered the house during the 5 episodes. Tappan produced a notebook from a side table and began writing names: the storage men, the dealer's porter, a frame repairman, an electrician, a man from the gas company, 2 auction porters delivering a painted chest. Each name would want examining. A mystery feeds on habits first and miracles last. When I had gone over the locks on both doors and looked at the hall window and the rear stair, I went back to the bureau. Tappan had placed the leather case on a chair. I asked him for the egg. He hesitated, then opened the case and handed it to me still wrapped in tissue. I unrolled it and held it near the lamp. In Wolf's office, it had looked quaint here. Under a stronger light, and with a reason to pay court to it, it improved. The red tulips were not all of one date. Most of the paint was old and dry with that soft, settled quality age gives to folkwork, but around 2 of the black dot rings and 1 blue leaf there was a different surface, just a little glossier, just a little newer, not new enough to shout, only new enough to fidget. You said you bought this at the Beecham estate sale 3 months ago, I said. Yes. Did anyone clean it, restore it, or handle it after that? Number, did you? Certainly not. I turned it slowly. The gold strokes at the top had wear on them, but not all wear is old. A nervous thumb can tell lies as efficiently as a brush. I held the egg closer. There was a place where the red paint had feathered over a line that ought not to have been there. A tiny curve, faint but deliberate. I reached into my pocket for my penknife, not to pry, only to use the little magnifier fitted into the handle. Under magnification, the line became clearer. It was not a crack in the wood. It was too regular. It made a shallow arc around the egg, interrupted by paint and age and later touching up. I looked up at Tappan. Did you ever notice this? He took the egg, peered, and shook his head. Number, because you were busy watching it travel. I took it back and traced the line with a fingernail. Seam, faint, well hidden, but there. The egg was made in 2 fitted halves that moved it from curiosity to business. Has it ever been opened? I asked. Not by me. Have you tried? Number, I thought it solid. So did the man who touched up the paint want you to keep thinking? Tappan stared. You mean there is something inside? Either that or someone went to the trouble of disguising a seam for exercise. His face changed. Fear had been in it before, but now it got company from greed, memory, and calculation. Collectors do not like learning that they have owned a secret without knowing it. It offends both pride and appetite.
Bino, from the doorway, said in his dry voice, "Shall I fetch tools, sir?" That was the first remark of his I genuinely admired. "No," I said. "Not yet. If I force it and break something, Wolf will explain my remains to the police. Let him have first crack at it." I kept studying the egg. Around the seam, especially on one side, the bright folk paint had been renewed by a hand that was careful but not calm. You could tell, a calm restorer follows the old surface like a prayer. A nervous one dabs where he fears the truth may show through. There had been touching up on the red tulip and the ring of black dots, not enough to remake the pattern, only enough to blur the line. Who in this house would know enough to do that? I asked without expecting much. No one. Tappan said at once. Mrs. Vale stiffened. "I paint chairs sometimes, sir, but not trinkets." Tappan licked his lips. Then the anonymous caller knew there was something in it. Maybe, or knew there was something about it. That is not the same thing. I wrapped the egg again and put it back in the case. But not before one more look at the bureau drawer. Once you suspect a hidden compartment inside a portable object, the drawer that keeps receiving it may be either an address or a signal. The repeated handling at the front edge now mattered more. Someone had been opening this drawer often. Perhaps to check for the egg, perhaps for something else connected with it, perhaps because the drawer itself held meaning before Tappan ever bought the bureau. "Where did this bureau come from?" I asked. "My mother's family. It was in our house in Connecticut, and came to me when my aunt died." "How long have you had it here?" 7 years. "And in all that time nothing unusual occurred until the egg arrived?" "Yes." That was useful and irritating. Useful because it narrowed the association. Irritating because it left too many doors standing open. I made notes on servants, locks, deliveries, and the dates of the 5 appearances. Then I asked to see the basement storage room. It was clean, orderly, and too well protected for a casual intruder, unless the intruder had a key or patience. Tappan unlocked it for me. The carton that had first held the egg was still there. Nothing about the room suggested ghosts. It suggested habits, servants, keys, and trust. I have often found that the word trust on a job means a lock that has not been questioned in years. "Back upstairs." In the hall outside the bedroom, Tappan said, "Well. You have locks that have been trusted too long, a house where several people can move without attracting attention, a bureau drawer that has been handled more than its neighbors, and a painted egg that somebody touched up to conceal a seam. That makes it a container. Once an object starts earning its keep, people start behaving badly around it." His fingers tightened on the case. "You think it contains money, jewels. I think it contains trouble. Money and jewels are only 2 dialects." He almost smiled at that, but worry smothered it. At the door Bino handed me my coat and hat with the same grave efficiency with which he might have handed a colonel his sword. Mrs. Vale had already gone back to the kitchen regions, where mystery ranked below dinner. Tappan insisted on giving me copies of his list and the names of everyone connected with the Beecham sale that he could remember. A person, a quaint little folk. Art nuisance had turned out to have a seam, recent paint, and somebody's anxiety smeared over it with a brush. That took it out of the nursery and put it squarely into our line of work. By the time I got a taxi downtown, the case had stopped being amusing. It had started earning its keep.
Chapter 3. The auction trail. When I got back to the brownstone, it was after 7, which meant that by Wolf's standards I had committed a social offense, and by mine, I had merely arrived in time to appreciate dinner. Fritz had prepared a braised veal with mushrooms that could have reconciled a bankrupt to taxes, and Wolf, seated at the end of the table, with his napkin deployed, and his expression fixed in dignified resignation toward the world, was not disposed to let business intrude until coffee, That suited me. There are moments when a detective's first duty is to his digestion. Not until we were back in the office, with Wolf installed behind his desk and me in the red leather chair, did I hand over the results of my visit to Tappan's house. He listened with his eyes mostly closed, fingertips meeting and separating by fractions of an inch. At the part about the fresh paint on the egg and the faint seam beneath it, he opened his eyes. You did not force it. Number, I had an impulse to leave my fingerprints off the future. Good brute action is for men who lack imagination and tools. He shifted his bulk a little, which in Wolf is equivalent to another man vaulting a fence. A seam, fresh paint, repeated returns to a particular drawer. The object contains something, has contained something, or is believed to contain something, and someone prefers that it rest in Mr. Tappan's bureau rather than in his own possession. Because a bureau drawer is safer than a pocket? Wolf's lips moved. At times, pockets are searched. Bureaus are trusted. That was good enough to write down, he went on. Tomorrow, you will trace Mr. Tappan's recent auction travels. Estate sales, country auctions, dealers' rooms, private viewings, all of it. There will be repetition. People who follow the same trail follow one another as well. Find me the names that recur around the trifles, not the furniture. Chests and tables attract ordinary greed. Small painted objects attract a more delicate vice. Delicate vice, I'll wear my best necktie. So the next morning, after Wolf had gone upstairs to spend 2 hours with the orchids, which were the only living things he addressed without suspicion, I started on the crooked trail. Tappan's notes gave me dates and places. My telephone calls gave me names, sale catalogues, and one clerk in Albany who sounded as if he had been born exhausted and had been proving it ever since. The first stop was the Madison Avenue office of Halliday & Voss, the firm that had conducted the Beecham estate sale in Dutchess County, where Tappan had acquired the painted egg as part of a miscellaneous lot. Their office had the polished stillness of a place where old objects are translated into cash, by men who never raise their voices, because raising a voice suggests uncertainty. Mr. Voss himself received me in a room lined with sale catalogues and framed engravings of furniture too expensive to sit on. He was smooth, dry, and perfectly brushed, with the sort of courtesy that never spills more than it intends. When I gave him my name, he offered exactly the amount of interest propriety required, and no more. Yes, he said, consulting a copy of the Beecham catalogue. Lot 48. A painted blanket chest, 2 carved birds, a wall box, assorted metal cutters, and 1 painted wooden object, possibly ceremonial. Mr. Julius Tappan purchased the lot. Was there spirited competition? There was bidding. Auctioneers always say that when they mean yes. He permitted himself a modest smile. Mr. Tappan had opposition from Saul Keemer, from Miss Leonora Brundage, and briefly from Peter Hahn, bidding for a client. I wrote them down. Any unusual attention to the wooden object? Unusual is a matter of judgment. You have one, use it. That got a second smile, smaller. Mr. Keemer inspected the lot before the sale. Miss Brundage did as well. The egg was handled by both. Peter Hahn. Hahn looked only at the chest. That was useful. Men who ignore the side dishes may still want the roast, but it narrows the appetite. Tell me about Keemer. Dealer, Americana folk material, decorative objects, energetic. Auction. Room talk is one of the few dialects where energetic means would sell his cousin if the frame were original. And Miss Brundage, a persistent private collector, enthusiastic about painted domestic objects and miniatures. Peter Hahn, a buyer for clients. He appears where money wishes not to be seen in person. That was clear enough. From Halliday. And Voss I went to Keemer's shop, a narrow establishment with a front window full of weather vanes, toy horses, and small painted boxes priced for optimists. Inside, the place smelled faintly of beeswax, old wood, and ambition. Saul Keemer was lean, dark, and quick in the eyes. He wore a good grey suit and a necktie, too lively for innocence. To what do I owe this distinction? Has Wolf taken to collecting? He collects facts, I said. I'm browsing. For what? For repetition. You were at Beecham. You were in Albany last month at the Pritchard sale. You were in Philadelphia at the Caro private viewing. You travel hard for a man interested in small painted objects. His smile stayed on, but it had to work now. I travel where merchandise is. So does Tappan. Tappan buys broadly. I buy selectively. That sounds expensive. Knowledge often is. I nodded toward a painted pantry box on a shelf. Is there a market now in little folk pieces that fit inside a hat? There is a market for quality in all dimensions. Also for things people believe are quality. Which side of that line are you on? That annoyed him, though not enough to break him. If this is wit, Mr. Goodwin, it deserves better housing. I'm saving the best for later. Did you want the painted egg at Beecham? His gaze changed just a shade too slowly. I wanted the lot, if the lot was cheap. Especially the egg? Number. It was a bad no. Too flat. Too cautious. Men who truly don't care about a trifle shrug at it. They do not set it down like glass. Did Miss Brundage want it? She wants everything painted before 1840. Did Peter Hahn? You would have to ask him. I intend to. Did you speak with Tappan after the sale? Briefly. About the egg. Number, he lied neatly, but not elegantly. A man who makes his living judging surface should know that surfaces show strain. Me next stop was Riverside Drive, where Miss Leonora Brundage lived, in an apartment that looked as if the 19th century had been unpacked there in stages and never quite persuaded to leave. Hooked rugs, theorem paintings, toy soldiers, carved birds, painted trays, and little boxes stood everywhere, all under the supervision of a narrow woman in black silk, with clear grey eyes and a nose sharpened by opinions. Yes, I saw the egg, she said at once when I mentioned Beecham. Charming, provincial. Probably not American, though the auctioneer hoped otherwise. Did you want it? I wanted to examine it longer. That is not the same thing. It often leads there. She ignored that. The paint interested me. Not because of the tulips. Those were competent because of the black rings. They had been disturbed. That tightened things. Disturbed how? Touched, renewed. A silly little repair, too fresh to be old and too timid to be professional. You noticed that at the sale. Yes, one notices such things when one has eyes and has paid for them. Did you say so to anyone? I remarked to Mr. Keemer that someone had meddled with it. He pretended indifference. That made me suspect he cared. There it was, straight from one appetite to another. Did Tappan hear this? I cannot say he was hovering. Mr. Tappan hovers when nervous. Did Peter Hahn examine it? Hardly. Mr. Hahn inspected values the way a banker inspects windows, only if he means to enter. That was Brundage, and though she said it acidly, I believed her. Peter Hahn took longer. He had no shop, only an office near Lexington with a brass plate, a secretary, and the atmosphere of discreet commissions. He was blonde, smooth, and agreeable in the way a card sharp is agreeable when he is not busy. He admitted being at Beecham and Albany and Philadelphia. I buy for several clients, he said. Patterns occur. That is what I'm studying. The same names keep circling the same little lots. He smiled. Small objects are easier to move than highboys, also easier to hide. That got a blink, very quick. Did you ever hear talk about a painted wooden egg from the Beecham estate? Number, did a client instruct you to bid on the miscellaneous lot? Number, I was watching the chest and dropped out. Which client? I don't discuss clients. You may before we're done. His smile flattened. If Wolf wishes to accuse me of something, he may do better than by sending you to fish. On the contrary, I fish well. By noon I had added 2 more places to the trail, the Albany Pritchard sale and the Philadelphia Caro viewing. In Albany, the clerk with the exhausted voice turned out to possess a sound memory when bribed with attention. He remembered Tappan, Keemer, Miss Brundage, and Hahn all attending, though not bidding heavily, except on small painted junk. His phrase, not mine. At Philadelphia, the widow Caro's nephew, who had supervised the viewing, remembered the same quartet, and added one more name, Andrew Dykes, restorer and occasional consultant, a man who knows old paint and talks too much when drinking. That improved the day considerably. By 3 o'clock I had enough notes to suggest not one straight line but a crooked braid. Tappan, Kemah, Brundage, and Hahn kept turning up at the same places, not around major furniture, not around silver, portraits, or the things that attract ordinary acquisitiveness. Around small folk objects, especially painted ones, especially those that could be picked up in one hand and slipped into a coat pocket by the right man with the wrong idea. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolf was in the office, restored from the plant rooms and contemplating a letter with disfavor. I handed him my notebook and gave him the story. He listened without interruption, which is his way of flattering facts. When I finished, he closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them again. "Yes," he said, "as expected. I hate when you say that. It suggests I walked all over 3 states for a conclusion you had already finished chewing. I had not finished. You have supplied the necessary fiber." He took the notebook and touched one thick finger to the repeated names. Tappan, Kemah, Brundage, Hahn, and now Dykes, a restorer. Excellent. The same handful of bidders circling the same class of objects, little painted things no one else would kill for. You think one of them would kill for this? I think one of them already values it more than comfort, honesty, or prudence. Murder is merely an additional vulgarity. He leaned back. The egg did not return to Mr. Tappan's drawer from affection. Someone was delivering it, repeatedly. That drawer was being used as a hiding place safer than a pocket, I said. Why Tappan's drawer? Why not a flower pot in Central Park? Because a drawer in a respectable collector's bedroom invites less curiosity than a pocket, a shop safe, or a dealer's premises. Also because the user had access, or expected access, to the room, a temporary depository, Archie. The egg could be placed there, reclaimed later, replaced if disturbed, until Tappan, with his absurd possessiveness, began carrying it about like a relic. That clicked. I heard it in my head. So the anonymous caller wasn't warning him for his health. He wanted the egg put back where the system expected it. Precisely. I looked at the notebook again. The auction trail was no longer picturesque. It was a route map for greed, drawn in train schedules, hotel registers, country lanes, and sale rooms where money talked low and listened hard. Somewhere along it, somebody had used a folk art toy as a container and Tappan's bureau drawer as a mailbox. The trouble with mailboxes is that sooner or later somebody opens the wrong one. Chapter 4. The rival in the gallery. The city intervened before Wolf had gathered anybody under our roof. That annoyed him, though not so much as if the interruption had come during meals or orchid hours. It was a little after 11 the next morning. Wolf was in the office behind his desk, broad, motionless, and apparently absorbed in a monograph on root ventilation for cymbidiums. Since he had not turned a page for 7 minutes, I knew the monograph was only being used as a shield while his mind worked on the repeated names from the auction trail. I was at my desk sorting notes and trying to decide which of Saul Kemah's lies had been the most elegant. None qualified. Kemah lied the way a dealer wraps fragile objects, with practice, speed, and a nervous eye on the value. The telephone rang. He took it. The voice was a woman's, controlled, but not naturally calm. She asked for Nero Wolf. I told her he existed and was occupied, and that she might save time by talking to me first. She said her name was Clara Wynne, that she managed the Caro Gallery on East 57th Street, and that a man had been found dead there after closing. That had my attention before she gave me the name. Who? I asked. Mr. Saul Kemah. That had all of it. I got the essentials in 3 questions, handed the receiver to Wolf, and watched his face. He listened, grunted once, said, "You should cooperate fully with the police," and then replaced the instrument. "Archie," he said, "our problem has become less whimsical. Mr. Kemah has been killed. I gathered that from the part where he was found dead. Go." Since I had no practical method of carrying Wolf under one arm, I went alone, The Caro Gallery occupied the ground floor of a narrow building with discreet windows and no vulgar signs. It was the sort of place where expensive old objects wait to be admired by people who do not ask the price aloud. By the time I got there, the building had already assumed that particular expression city rooms acquire when death has visited them and left officials behind. A patrolman stood at the front door with the settled gloom of a man on stationary duty. Inside, dust had been disturbed, quiet had been offended, and the place smelled faintly of old paint, dry wood, wet coats, and the metallic aftertaste of trouble. Clara Wynne met me near the front desk. She was in her 30s, dark-haired, straight-backed, and pale with determination rather than fright. She wore a plain grey dress and handled herself like a woman who had decided to postpone trembling until it was private and worthwhile. "You are Archie Goodwin." "Yes," you called Wolf. "Yes, the police are in the rear room." "Who found him?" "I did, at 8:40, when I unlocked the gallery." She led me through the front room. There were primitive portraits, 2 painted cupboards, weather vanes with cracked surfaces and wounded dignity, and a row of small domestic pieces arranged under glass. It was a good room for commerce and a poor room for dying, which of course never stops anybody. The rear room was narrower and more crowded. 3 tall painted saints leaned against one wall, waiting either for sale or absolution. Opposite them stood a group of cracked weather vanes and a dismantled trade sign. On the floor, partly between the saints and the vanes, lay Saul Keema under a sheet. One shoe stuck out, and one hand, long and narrow, lay palm upward as if asking a question too late. Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins was there, with a notebook, a broad face, and the look of a man who would have preferred to be working a burglary. "Murder in an art gallery requires too much patience." "Hello, Archie," he said. "You people do move fast when there's culture involved." "Morning, Pearlie. I only go where the decor is stronger than the coffee." He snorted. "Dealer named Keema, head smashed. Probably last night. No witnesses yet. No sign of a general rummage. Miss Wynne says he had no business being here after closing," Miss Wynne said. "He telephoned yesterday afternoon and asked whether he might look again at some unsold Caro material, especially the smaller painted pieces. I told him the gallery closed at 6. He came at 5:20 and left before 6. And later got back in," I said. "That," Pearlie told me, "is one of the items on our list." He let me look at the body because Pearlie is sensible enough to know that objecting too soon wastes breath. Keema's face had lost the quick, oily alertness I had seen in his shop. Death had simplified him, and not in a flattering way. There was a heavy bruise and break at the left temple. A hard blow, close work, no flourish. On the floor several feet away stood a short iron support used for a weather vane display. Pearlie said, "Blood on the edge. Don't admire it. I won't hang it over the mantel." I straightened and took the room in again. Keema had been found where a man might go if he were searching in haste for something hidden behind the larger pieces. The dust near the baseboards had been disturbed. Not swept, not trampled by a crowd, but broken here and there by recent movement. Near the wall behind one of the painted saints, there was a faint, clean arc about knee-high, where something had been touched or shifted. I bent for a closer look. "Find religion, Archie?" Pearlie asked. "Only dust. It's the most truthful witness in New York." He grunted. "We looked back there. Did you find anything?" "If we had, you wouldn't have it." "Fair enough." The saint stared past us all with resigned wooden eyes. I turned to Clara Wynne. "What exactly was Keema studying yesterday?" She crossed to a glass-topped table and indicated several objects still set there. 2 painted pantry boxes, a small wall shelf, a carved bird, a child's alphabet panel, a toy house, and a little wooden pear with green streaks that made it look self-important. "He handled nearly everything on this table," she said. "The smallest pieces, especially painted ones. He seemed dissatisfied." "Did he ask for a painted egg?" She hesitated just enough to make the answer useful. "Not in those words. Try some others." He asked whether any small closed objects had been separated from the Caro material before consignment. He mentioned toys, devotional containers, and sewing pieces. That was better. Did anyone hear him? There was another visitor near closing, she said, Mr. Peter Hahn. That improved the room at once. Hahn was here. Yes, he came in around 5:30. He and Mr. Keemer spoke in the front room, quietly. I was with a client and did not hear them clearly. Pearlie said, "We'll hear Hahn clearly enough." "Maybe," I said. "He has a talent for making words wear gloves." At the front desk, Miss Wynne showed me a right-hand drawer, standing slightly ajar. A neat brass lock. "No damage. Good old wood, darkened by years of use," she said. "I always lock this. It was open this morning. What's in it?" "Receipts, consignment slips, old labels, correspondence, petty cash in a tin box." "Was the cash gone?" "Number that helps. A thief who ignores cash in favor of paper usually has a better motive." I examined the drawer, contents in order, but too much order. Someone had gone through the papers and put them back carefully, which is one of the commonest confessions. People think neatness erases curiosity. It only advertises it. "Who has keys to the gallery?" "Mrs. Caro and I." "The cleaning woman has a front key only for mornings. There may once have been a third key years ago, but I do not know where. Meaning there may still be one walking around in a pocket." "Yes." Back in the rear room, I studied Keemer's position again. He had fallen on his side, one shoulder partly twisted under him, as if turning when struck. There were no signs of a prolonged fight, no overturned cases, no shattered glass, no heroic struggle among saints and weather vanes. Either he had trusted the person with him or the quarrel had been brief and efficient. "Any marks on his hands?" I asked Pearlie. "Minor scrape on one knuckle. Nothing grand." "A man can die over something small," I said. "Sure," Pearlie told me. "Money often folds up." That line was good enough to keep. I asked Clara Wynne whether Keemer had ever dealt directly with Mrs. Caro. She said only occasionally. Mrs. Caro was elderly, wealthy, and preferred letting others manage transactions. The gallery handled estate leftovers, private placements, and selected consignments, especially folk material and devotional objects from regional collections. Small lots often came in poorly described by ignorance or design. I asked. She looked at me, both occur. "Did the Caro material include anything like Tappan's egg?" "I don't know what Mr. Tappan has." "You may before long." She said nothing, but she understood that the ground under the case had shifted. A dealer was dead, and he had come back, after hours, to look for something small, closed and painted. Before I left, Pearlie took me aside. "Kramer'll want Wolf to keep his paws out unless they're useful. Wolf's paws never leave the office. You know what I mean." "I do, and for once I sympathize. A dead dealer in a gallery looks simple enough for headlines. Antique rivalry dispute over a sale. One man swings iron. End of sermon." Pearlie's mouth twitched. "That's close, but not close enough." He gave me a look. "Why?" "Because Keemer wasn't killed over an antique as merchandise. He was killed because he knew the value of something that was never meant to be sold in public. There's a difference." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Pearlie is not sentimental about theories, but he knows when one has bones. Outside, East 57th Street was brightening under a thin noon sun, with taxis nosing along, and people moving briskly, as if nobody had time for murder before lunch. I took a cab back to the brownstone and found Wolf where I had left him, except that the orchid book had been replaced by a volume of Tacitus. He looked at my face and grunted. Well, Keemer dead in the Caro Gallery after hours, hit on the temple with an iron vein support. He had come back for small painted objects. Hahn was there near closing. A desk drawer was searched, but not robbed. Dust says Keemer, or somebody with him, was reaching behind a painted saint. No general fight. Wolf shut the book. "Good. Sit down and be coherent." I gave it to him from the beginning. All of it. Clara Wynne, Pearly, the iron stand, the searched drawer, the repeated attention to small painted objects, and the question about closed containers. Wolf listened without interruption. When I finished, he sat with his eyes closed for perhaps 10 seconds, then he opened them. "The police," he said. "We'll see a fight over antiques, a dealer, a gallery, after hours, a blunt instrument, all delightfully ordinary. They will be wrong in the essential point. Which is, an antique is sold when its value is known and agreed. Kima was killed because he knew the worth of something that was not in commerce at all. Not properly, not yet. The egg. Or what the egg conceals, or what it identifies. In any case, something hidden in plain sight among trifles. Kima returned to the gallery, searching not for inventory, but for a category. Small, painted, closed objects. Someone else knew it and silenced him. He leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. This is no longer merely a trick of concealment. It is an arrangement of custody. The egg, Tappan's bureau drawer, the gallery drawer, the hidden places behind saints, temporary repositories, transfer points. Mailboxes, I said. Yes. Wolf's eyes hardened, and one of the postmen has been murdered. That was neat, and I wished I had said it. I got up and crossed to the window. The street outside had resumed its normal imperturbable traffic, as if galleries, collectors, dealers, and corpses were all just part of the daily inventory. In New York, perhaps they are. Behind me, Wolf said, "Archie, before the day ends, I want Clara Wynne, Peter Hahn, Julius Tappan, Miss Brundage, and Mr. Andrew Dykes investigated as to movements last night. Also Mrs. Carrow, insofar as age and convenience permit, and I want that egg opened, but not yet. Not until I know who expects it to remain closed." That was Wolf all over. A corpse in a gallery, a killer at large, and the one thing he would not tolerate was premature curiosity. I turned from the window. "You think Kima knew too much?" "No," Wolf said. "I think he knew just enough to die." Chapter 5. The seam beneath the paint by the time I got back from a round of telephone calls and one unproductive conversation with Peter Hahn's secretary, who had the gift of making ignorance sound notarized. Wolf had finished lunch, resented it only in theory, and was in the office with the painted egg on his desk. It lay there on a square of clean blotting paper, as if under examination for bad manners. Wolf sat behind it with his heavy head a little bent and his eyes narrowed. When Wolf gives that look to an object, the object has already been tried, convicted, and invited to explain itself before sentence is passed. "Well," I said. "Well," Wolf returned. "It is an impertinent trifle, badly repainted in spots by a hand that lacked either skill or composure. Sit down." I sat. He touched the egg with one thick finger and rotated it a fraction. "You were right about the seam. It is here, here, and here, partially concealed under recent paint. The person who renewed the surface feared discovery, but feared damage more. Therefore, the contents, whatever they are, were more important than appearance, or more expensive. That is merely a vulgar synonym. He had already assembled tools, not because he trusted tools more than brains, but because even brains must occasionally pry. There was a magnifying glass, a thin-bladed knife from one of the desk drawers, a pair of tweezers, and, to my surprise, a shallow bowl of warm water that Fritz had evidently supplied under protest, and without explanation. Wolf glanced at me. "You will open it." "Why me?" "Because if it breaks in your hands, I shall blame you with greater satisfaction." That was reasonable enough. I took the chair nearer the desk and lifted the egg. It was lighter than it looked, and warmer from the room. Under the magnifier, the seam showed clearly now that I knew where to flatter it. The fresh paint had been feathered over the join, but not perfectly. At one point near the blue leaf, the line widened by the width of a hair. Wolf said, "Do not pry like a stevedore. Moisten the repainted area first." I did. The warm water softened the newer paint slightly, enough for the knife edge to slide without biting the old surface. It was slow work, and Wolf's silence behind me had all the encouragement of a magistrate. I eased the blade along the seam, lifting only where the repaint had sealed it. Twice it resisted. The third time there was the faintest little click. I stopped breathing. "Proceed," Wolf said. "That always helps." I turned the egg gently in my hands, pressing with thumb and forefinger at opposite ends. For a second, nothing happened. Then the upper half shifted, no more than a whisper. I lifted it free. Inside was a hollow chamber, neatly made and barely larger than a walnut's interior. In it lay a tight roll of paper, narrow as a ribbon and yellowed at the edge, held by a faded thread. Neither Wolf nor I spoke for a moment. Then he said, "Tweezers. I used them." The roll came out intact. The chamber was otherwise empty. "Any powder? Any stones?" Wolf asked. "Nothing, just the paper." "Open it." I untied the thread and unrolled the strip across the blotter. It was covered with columns of tiny figures and letters written in brown ink that had aged but not faded beyond use. At first glance it looked like the kind of ingenious nonsense collectors sometimes attach to their possessions to make themselves feel that ownership is scholarship. Then I looked closer. There were lot numbers, dates, initials, dollar figures, not prayers, not inventory, not a child's game. I read aloud. L48, JT 450, L63, SK 300, L14, PH 700. Then a mark, maybe paid or cleared. Here's another date. More lot numbers. Different initials, CW once, LB twice, AD SK again. Wolf held out his hand. I gave him the strip. His eyes moved, not quickly, but with complete attention. That is one of the few spectacles I never tire of, Nero Wolfe reading something that has suddenly justified the trouble of existing. "At least," he said, "the dead man was no mystic." "What is it?" He laid the strip flat, exactly what it appears to be, once one rejects stupidity. Not devotional notes, not collector's memoranda, auction instructions. Lot numbers and prices. Ceilings, bidding limits fixed in advance. See here, the same initials recur, but never on competing high figures for the same lot. One name, one ceiling. The others are either absent or assigned low values. A ring, that landed hard enough. You mean they were dividing the kills before the sale? Of course, a conspiracy among bidders. They decide in advance who will take which lot and how high the nominal competition may go. That keeps prices low, sellers ignorant, and profits agreeable. Primitive, illegal, and extremely common wherever greed discovers arithmetic. I looked again at the strip. It changed under my eyes. What had seemed crabbed little figures now showed discipline. The numbers were not random. Each lot had one serious ceiling and several harmless ones. Enough bidding to look honest. Not enough to spoil the arrangement. Kima Hahn, Brundage, I said. Maybe Dykes too. Possibly Clara Wynne, though her initials may signify another person. We will not force a fit when patience will do. Then the egg was a courier pouch. Wolf nodded. A convenient one. Quaint, forgettable, portable, unlikely to be searched, passed among conspirators, left in hiding places, retrieved before each sale. And when Mr. Tappan purchased it accidentally with the Beecham lot, he disrupted the machinery. That explains the returns to the drawer. Yes, someone had been using that drawer as a deposit point, perhaps long before Tappan understood it. When the egg was taken away, it had to be restored, not for sentimental reasons, but because the ring needed its account book. I frowned at the strip. If this is the account book, why kill Kima? He already knew the racket. Wolf's eyes lifted. Because knowledge in a conspiracy is never evenly distributed. He may have known more than the others believed safe, or he may have wanted to use it. Blackmail is merely theft with stationery. That was good enough to keep. I bent closer to the paper. Beside some entries were tiny marks, a cross, a circle, once a double slash. Any idea what those mean? Settlement, payment, dispute, or failure? We shall learn. The important fact is already plain. Our painted egg carried the private bidding limits for a ring of conspirators, rigging auctions from the shadows. I let out a breath. That ought to brighten Kramer's day. Number it will darken it. Police prefer murder to mathematics. He was right. A dealer killed over an argument is easy. A dealer killed because a hidden ledger of collusive bidding passed through too many hands is administrative. And administration gives policemen headaches. Wolf pushed the strip back toward me. Make copies. One for me, one in reserve. One to be hidden where even you will not mislay it. You distrust my filing. I distrust your species. I got up for the typewriter, then paused. What about Tappan? Tell him nothing yet. Except that the egg has ceased to be decorative and has become useful. Also, Archie, he is now in danger. Because he owned the thing. Because he interrupted a criminal arrangement and may be supposed to know more than he does. When thieves are frightened, they enlarge the intelligence of bystanders. I looked at the opened egg halves on the blotter. Without the roll inside, they seemed cheaper, almost foolish, just painted wood with delusions. But that was only appearance. In our business, appearance is often the most expensive wrapping available. The seam beneath the paint had finally opened, and what it disclosed was not romance or piety or family sentiment. It was greed set down in figures, coded just enough to deny itself, precise enough to make money. A small toy egg, passed hand to hand through sale rooms and private galleries, had been carrying the secret ceilings of men and women who cheated in whispers while auctioneers sang. No wonder it had kept coming home. For the ring, it was not an ornament, it was the book of rules. And somebody had already killed to keep the rules from being read. Chapter 6. The Servants. The safe return, and the silent courier. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the office had acquired the look it gets when a case has stopped being picturesque and begun to earn its own expenses. The painted egg lay in two halves on Wolf's desk, one to each side of the blotter, with the narrow strip of figures copied, locked away, and no longer able to pretend innocence. Outside, New York had brightened into a watery gray. The pavement still damp, the traffic persistent, and the sky holding back just enough rain to seem vindictive. Inside, Wolf sat behind his desk with both hands on the chair arms and his eyes half closed. That pose means one of two things. Either he is considering a problem to death, or he is considering whether the problem deserves to live. I was at my desk with the morning's notes, Tappan's list of callers and deliveries, and a growing respect for the criminal uses of ordinary domestic routine. Wolf opened his eyes. The drawer, he said, was not cursed. That will break Tappan's heart. It may also save his life. There is no sorcery here, only convenience. The egg returned because someone kept returning it. I nodded. The idea had been forming in me for an hour, but it sounds better when Wolf says it first. He can make an obvious fact seem like a verdict from Mount Sinai. The drawer in the bureau, he went on, was not chosen because it possessed mystical affection for a painted trifle. It was chosen because it was available, stable, and unexamined. A hiding place is safest when everybody who sees it believes it belongs to the furniture. That fits. Servants don't challenge what already belongs there. Precisely. They challenge novelty. A package on a hall chair may be questioned. A painted object in a drawer already used for miscellany is invisible. That was the point. Tappan had mistaken a delivery system for the odd behavior of an object he had already decided was special. Collectors are vulnerable there. Once an item begins to interest them, they are ready to assign it temperament, history, and almost a soul. If it then behaves in an unusual fashion, they do not always ask the practical question first, namely, who has been touching it? I said. So the egg did not come home. It was delivered. Wolf nodded. Repeatedly, quietly, under cover of routine. The same routine that makes city houses seem secure when in fact they are simply crowded with tolerated motion. That deserved more than a grunt, so I gave it a sentence. A courier could come and go because rich houses are fed all day long. Laundry, florists, storage men, dealers, repairmen, wine cases, packed trunks, auction lots, a man to look at the furnace, another to adjust a shade. If you arrive carrying something and behave as though you belong, Half the battle is won. The other half, Wolf said, is won if the servants are well trained. That was one of his better thrusts, and deserved one in return. You mean Bino? I mean discipline in a disorderly house. Intrusion is noticed because everything is already suspect. In an orderly house, routine becomes authority. Mr. Bino receives persons, directs parcels, and keeps the machine civil. Mrs. Vale dusts what is there, and does not interrogate the existence of each object. Mr. Tappan lives amid his possessions, like a man presiding over a private museum. When the egg appears in the drawer, he assumes continuity instead of trespass. I had gone back over the 5 returns: basement storage, Philadelphia, Madison Avenue, downtown office, Riverdale. That last one had bothered me from the beginning. An object can vanish from a hotel valise if someone shadows you. It can leave a dealer's parcel if the dealer is crooked or frightened. But to disappear from the apartment of a friend in Riverdale and reappear in Tappan's bureau drawer by the next morning meant not miracle but system. Whoever was moving it knew the home address, knew the drawer, and had access to the house often enough for the placement to be possible. The courier had to know the room and the drawer, I said. Yes, and not by guesswork. If he just wanted a hiding place, any drawer would do, but this one had history. Perhaps before Tappan ever noticed the egg, perhaps before the Beecham sale. We must not assume that the egg and the drawer became connected only when he bought the object. That clicked. I had been seeing the thing from Tappan outward. Wolf had already moved behind him and begun looking at the system itself. The bureau came from his mother's family, I said. Connecticut house. In his possession 7 years. Yes, and people often inherit furniture along with uses they know nothing about. A drawer may become a depository by habit, and habit can outlive households. I looked down at my notes. You think the ring, or someone in it, had been using Tappan's bureau as a drop long before Tappan knew there was anything to drop? I think it possible. The safest mailbox is one the owner never knows is a mailbox. That gave the whole thing a nasty elegance, a collector's house full of harmless small objects, a drawer in a bedroom bureau that no one but the owner and servants would ever think about. A courier who could enter with a bundle or a tool case or a wrapped parcel, go upstairs on some respectable pretext, and leave a painted egg among the rest. No curse, no ghost, only a criminal system prospering because everyone around it was well behaved. Who would the courier be? I asked. Wolf's lips moved. You are addicted to premature naming. Resist it. We know only the qualities required. Familiarity with auctions and with the ring's movements. Access to houses and galleries under innocent cover. The ability to pass among servants without leaving a bruise on memory. Above all, a face and manner that belong to routine. Not Kima. Number Kima was too visible, too acquisitive, too aware of his own importance. He entered rooms as a principal, not as a functionary. Hahn, perhaps, if disguised by profession, but I doubt it. Miss Brundage, certainly not. Mr. Dykes, the restorer, is more plausible. So are porters, delivery men, handlers, and anyone attached to the movement of lots between sale room, dealer, and owner. That agreed with my own drift. The silent courier in such a case would not be the loudest appetite in the room. He would be the man no one bothered to describe afterward. I said. The collector helped the trick along. Of course, rich men often do. Repetition becomes eccentricity if one can afford not to inquire. Mr. Tappan noticed the egg, decided it was interesting, gave it a place, and then interpreted each return in the light of that first vanity. He did not say, "Who is using my furniture?" he said. "Why is this special object attached to me?" A fatal distinction. I grinned. You are hard on collectors. I am hard on vanity. Collecting is merely one of its hobbies. The telephone rang. I took it, listened, and covered the mouthpiece. Kramer's office. He wants you informed that Peter Hahn denies seeing Kima after 5:40 yesterday, and Miss Wynne denies any private discussion of eggs, saints, or coded conspiracies. Wolf grunted. Tell Inspector Kramer, I am overwhelmed by the novelty of denial. I told them something close to that, and hung up. When I turned back, Wolf was looking at the egg halves again. "There is another point," he said. "Good, I was getting comfortable. The courier did not merely return the egg. He returned it safely. No damage, no alteration except the touch, up to conceal the seam. That means the courier was not ignorant labor. He knew the object mattered and understood how to handle it. A specialist. That narrowed the field some, though not enough to cheer me. Men who handle objects carefully for a living are thick on the ground in auction rooms, galleries, restorers' shops, private collections, and storage houses. New York maintains an entire class of professionals whose livelihood depends on touching valuable things without looking as though they are touching them. I got up and went to the window. The street was busy with the usual harmless criminalities of traffic, commerce, and human impatience. Somewhere out there was a man or woman who had been moving a painted egg in and out of respectable interiors as if it were a household errand. Kima had died because he knew too much, or thought he did. Tappan had blundered into the system because he liked painted folk nonsense and had enough money to buy it by the lot. Behind me, Wolf said, "Archie." "Yes. Tomorrow you will go again to Mr. Tappan's house. This time do not inspect the furniture. Inspect the routine. Hours, entries, deliveries, who goes upstairs, who carries parcels, who is admitted without announcement, who is remembered only as summoner from the gallery, or a man from storage. Make Bino and Mrs. Vale reconstruct a week as if their salaries depended on chronology. They may object. Then frighten them modestly. I always do." He nodded. The case has now yielded its method. The bureau drawer was not magical. It was merely convenient. The egg's safe return depended on servants, habit, and the immense camouflage of good order. Once we identify the silent courier, the rest will begin to confess. That was Wolf in his best key, heavy, certain, and irritatingly right. The collector had thought the egg special and had therefore missed the simple truth. Objects do not develop loyalties. People develop systems. And a criminal system, if it runs long enough through a rich house, can begin to look exactly like domestic routine. Chapter 7. The ring behind the hammer by the next afternoon, the case had reached the stage Wolf likes best and most mistrusts. The point where facts begin agreeing with one another. A single fact can be a liar. Two may be cousins. But when a dozen little facts gathered from auction rooms, gallery drawers, servants' memories, and a painted egg with a false shell begin fitting together without complaint, Nero Wolf grows almost amiable. Not amiable enough to be mistaken for human softness, of course, but enough to stop biting the furniture. The office on West 35th Street had its working look. Wolf behind his desk, broad and immovable, with the globe lamp burning though daylight still held outside. I was at my desk with sale catalogues, typed copies of the coded strip from the egg, and a sheet on which I had matched initials, lot numbers, dates, and hammer prices, until the arrangement ceased to look accidental and became vulgar. New York beyond the windows had turned bright and windy. Taxis leaped. Pedestrians leaned into corners as if arguing with the air. In the old brownstone, however, the world had been reduced to columns, names, and the cost of dishonesty. Wolf held the typed copy of the narrow paper between thumb and finger. "Again," he said. I gave it to him again. The coded slip from the egg matches recent auction records too neatly to be anything but business. The lot numbers correspond to Beecham, Pritchard in Albany, Bennett in New Jersey, and the private Caro material. In each case, one person in the group had the true bidding ceiling, and the others either stayed out or offered just enough resistance to make the room believe there was competition. Wolf nodded. Specifics. At the Pritchard sale, Lot 14, initials PH ceiling 700. Peter Hahn takes it at 640 after minor nudges from Kima and Brundage. At Bennett, Lot 22, SK ceiling 350, Kima gets the piece for 310 at Caro, Lot 9, LB ceiling 250, Leonora Brundage buys at 220. Same dance, different floor. Wolf's eyes half closed. And Beecham. That is where the dance slipped. Lot 48. The miscellaneous group containing the egg was evidently assigned inside the ring. But Julius Tappan, not being in the arrangement and having the manners of a collector in season, bid above their planned ceiling and carried the lot off, thus stealing not merely an object but a record. Yes, only he didn't know it. He thought he had bought a chest, a few odds and ends, and one painted nuisance. Wolf set the typed sheet down. There we have the shape of it. Dealers, private bidders, and at least one person attached to a gallery or estate material, cooperating to keep public prices low until the right buyer stepped in later at private profit. I had spent most of the morning proving that, once the coded slip was mapped against catalogues and sale results, the scheme became offensively plain. This was not the work of one greedy dealer freelancing at country auctions. It was organized, paced, and distributed. The members took turns. One got a painted box cheaply, another a devotional carving, another a miniature cupboard or fracture. The sham competition kept appearances intact. Then, after the sale, the true market began quietly and profitably among collectors with more money than knowledge. Not big furniture, I said, not portraits, silver, or anything that would draw broad attention. Number smaller folk material, painted domestic pieces, toys, primitive devotional objects, miniatures, the very class of things that honest people undervalue because they are small and ignorant people overpay for because they are quaint. That includes Tappan. That includes most collectors, Wolf said. They buy sentiment and call it discernment. I let that pass because it was both unfair and useful. On my desk was another note from a telephone call, one of several I had made after visiting Tappan's house again. Bino and Mrs. Vale, under modest pressure, had reconstructed the household traffic better than I expected. A restorer had called twice in the last 3 months. A man from a gallery had once delivered wrapped pieces to the upstairs sitting room. Auction porters had carried in boxes without close supervision because Tappan was used to such movements. Routine, as Wolf had said, was the best cloak in Manhattan. I said, the courier had cover because the ring had structure. Somebody had access to houses and sales. Somebody knew the lots in advance. Somebody could read surfaces and mend them, and somebody could place the goods afterward. Kima, Hahn, Brundage, Dykes, and maybe Clara Wynne. Wolf's brows moved a little. Maybe? The initials Kelbu occur 3 times on the strip. That might be Clara Wynne. It might not. But if it is, the gallery manager was not merely guarding saints and invoices. She was assigned pieces. She would be valuable, Wolf said. Access to private consignments, knowledge of what had been separated from estates, authority to admit selected viewers, and the professional habit of seeming incidental. A discreet gallery manager is one of civilization's more dangerous inventions. That had style, so I wrote it down. Andrew Dykes also fitted too well for comfort. A restorer who attended previews to advise on surface and authenticity, according to one clerk. A man able to touch up the egg's paint to conceal the seam. A man who could handle objects, enter respectable interiors, and leave them improved in every sense, except the moral one. And Kima, I said, wanted more. Wolf looked at me. Yes. That had been the other pattern, and the uglier. I had spent part of lunch hour comparing the later entries on the coded strip with earlier ones. The marks beside Kima's initials changed. Where others had neat circles or slashes, Kima had cross marks, then double marks, then one entry with a figure altered upward in another ink. Not proof, but temper. In a conspiracy, altered figures are shouted threats written in miniature. He was pressing, I said, for a larger share, a better turn, or private side payment. Maybe because he was doing more of the field work. Maybe because he knew the bookkeeping sat inside the egg and thought that gave him leverage. Undoubtedly, Wolf said. A ring depends upon confidence only until one member learns the exact numbers. Then confidence becomes blackmail waiting for stationery. I grinned. You had that line ready. I have many lines ready. Use the ones that earn their keep. I leaned back and looked at the spread before me. The whole scheme now had body Hahn, smooth and useful, buying for clients and perhaps for himself. Brundage, collector enough to love the objects and greedy enough to love them cheaply. Dykes, with his knowledge of paint, his access and his careful hands. Keema, dealer, broker, bully, and now corpse. Clara Wynne, perhaps the quiet hinge on which private material swung from estate to gallery to selected bidder. There was a ring behind the hammer. At public auction the auctioneer sang. Bids rose, and the room believed itself entertained by open competition. Behind that performance sat the hidden figures. Ceilings set in advance, names assigned, profits preserved. The dead man had not been killed because antiques inspire passion. He had been killed because arithmetic does. Woolf said, greed alone rarely explains murder. It explains theft, fraud, collusion, adulteration, and marriage. Murder generally requires an additional stimulus, fear. Yes, panic to be exact. The panic that follows when greed thinks it has been seen. That was pure Woolf and exactly right. Keema had not died, merely because he wanted a larger share. Men quarrel over money every day and survive to quarrel again. He died because someone believed he might reveal the numbers, the ceilings, the turn, taking, the rigging itself. Once the hidden slip in the egg became a possible weapon instead of a bookkeeping aid. The ring ceased to be a partnership and became a kennel. In Riddle Street fashion, I said. Woolf frowned. Do not manufacture literary references in my office. I only meant it was not the greed but the exposure. That is at least intelligible. He folded his hands over his middle and shut his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the case had moved another inch inside his head. Keema was pressing for more. The others knew it. He goes to the gallery after hours searching for small, closed painted objects. He has either lost possession of the egg or fears someone else has it. He is killed. Therefore his killer was not merely annoyed. The killer was frightened that Keema would recover the record or disclose enough without it. Which puts Hahn, Dykes, Brundage, and maybe Clara Wynne in the warm seats, yes, and possibly Mr. Tappan, though only as a fool, not as a murderer. That will comfort him. It should shame him. I got up and crossed to the window. Down on the street a truck was double parked, and a cab driver was improving the English language with his horn. The city looked clean in the bright air, but that was only distance. Up close, it was the same old inventory, appetite in hats and overcoats. Behind me, Woolf said, Archie, it is time to stop admiring the pattern and begin pulling at it. I want Hahn here tomorrow. Also, Miss Brundage, Mr. Dykes, Mr. Tappan, and Miss Wynne. Individually first, not together. I will not have them infecting one another with caution. And Kramer. We shall inform him when it becomes impossible not to. The police, if brought in too early, will begin by asking the wrong question. Which is who hit Keema? Number Y Antiques. I turned from the window. He had it. That was always the dangerous part of working for him. When Woolf settled his bulk and let a thought harden, the room seemed to tilt toward the conclusion. The ring behind the hammer was no longer invisible. It had names, methods, routes, and a dead man at one end of it. Keema had wanted more money, perhaps more respect, perhaps merely the satisfaction of proving he could frighten the others. But murder had not come from greed alone. It had come when greed suddenly realized it might be read aloud. And once greed thinks it has been seen, it stops bargaining and starts striking. Chapter 8. Archie walks into the dark end, when Nero Woolf wants bait. He never volunteers to dangle from the hook himself. He considers that a wise division of labor, and since I am the labor, I usually end up agreeing after the fact. It was a little before 6 when he arranged me on the wrong side of prudence. You will go, he said, as a buyer's scout, not for yourself. You are too recognizable and too impertinent. Thank you. For a client with money, uncertain taste, and a lively appetite for folk material from the Varlin estate sale next week in Westchester. There is no Varlin estate sale. There will be in the minds of the guilty if you speak of it with sufficient boredom. You have seen a list, you say. You have also seen something else you do not fully understand, but enough to know that certain persons may wish to speak with you privately. I nodded. And if they ask what I've seen, you will not show hunger. Merely concern. You have noticed repeated initials beside lot numbers and figures, perhaps on a strip of paper, hidden inside an object not meant to be opened. You are uncertain whether it is fraud, bookkeeping, or blackmail. You are not a policeman. You are a practical man interested in keeping your client from overpaying and yourself from being struck on the head. That last part I can sell from experience. Wolf ignored it. They will bite guilty. People are always hungriest when silence is on the menu. That was good enough to keep. I took it with me. The first nibble came from Peter Hahn. I telephoned him at his office and was informed by the efficient woman at the desk that Mr. Hahn was occupied. I said I represented a buyer who had seen an advance note on the Varlin material, and that if Mr. Hahn wished to avoid an awkward misunderstanding over private bidding figures associated with recent sales, he had better call me within the hour. He called in 14 minutes. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, smooth as cream poured over ice. "You seem determined to make yourself tiresome. Tiresome is cheaper than funerals. A silence not long, but alive. You are being obscure. Only because telephones have bad manners. I've seen enough to know a few people have been arranging prices before the hammer falls. If my client is about to wander into the same neighborhood, I prefer to know the rent in advance. What exactly have you seen?" Enough to avoid asking that question twice. Another silence. Then, very calm, "Perhaps we should talk. That depends on where. I dislike offices. Too much furniture that remembers." He gave a small laugh, practiced and bloodless. "Very well, Clara Wynne will open the Caro Gallery tonight at 11:30. Come alone." There it was, delivered without strain, which made it better. "Or worse," I said. "If I don't like what I hear, then you will have heard something. That is progress." He hung up, I told Wolf. He closed his eyes and grunted. "Good, go. That's all. What more do you want?" "A hymn. You will wear the shoulder holster. You will not produce the weapon unless necessity has shed all ambiguity. You will also carry the miniature flashlight in your left pocket and the pocket recorder in your inside coat lining. You have become modern. I have become realistic. If Hahn attends, he will not come merely to exchange pleasantries. Archie, remember this. The killer is unlikely to be the most visibly acquisitive rogue. Kima was that. The killer will be the person who can remain calm while deciding another man's breathing has become inconvenient, which is nearly cheerful. It is exact. At 11:20 I was on East 57th Street with the city reduced to wet black pavement, shuttered windows, and the late traffic growl that sounds as if Manhattan resents sleep on principle. The Caro Gallery stood dark except for a line of light at the side door. I went in by that route because only fools insist on the front entrance after midnight. Clara Wynne admitted me. She wore the same plain competence as before, but tonight it was tighter. Her face was pale, her eyes watchful, and her voice low. "You came. Did you expect a telegram instead?" She led me through the front room, past the painted cupboards and the saints, to the rear gallery. Only 2 lamps were lit. Their shaded light left the corners in shadow. Old wood and varnish held the air. One of the tall saints leaned near the wall as before, its painted eyes fixed on eternity and not helping. Hahn stood by the glass table where the smaller objects had been displayed. Andrew Dykes was with him. That pleased me. 2 names for the price of 1 errand. Hahn was immaculate as ever, blonde, mild, and polished. Dykes was different, thick through the shoulders, with a careful face and hands that looked stronger than a restorer's had any right to. Calm hands, the sort that could touch up a seam and not spill a drop. Hahn said, "Mr. Goodwin, I appreciate punctuality. I practice it when death has already had an introduction." Dykes gave me a flat look. "What have you seen?" "Not enough to admire," I said. "A strip of paper, with lot numbers, initials, and ceilings, enough to suggest certain auctions have been less spontaneous than advertised." Clara Wynne stiffened. Only a little. Hahn did not move at all. "That is a serious suggestion," he said. "Number, it's a cheap one. The serious part comes after. I let that sit, then added, my client dislikes dishonest markets. I dislike being made a fool. Kima, apparently, disliked his share. At that, Dykes moved first. Not much. Just a shift of weight. But it was there. Hahn saw him do it and still did not move. That was better. You are mistaken about Mr. Kima, Hahn said. Am I? He had begun pressing, hadn't he? Larger turns, better allotments, maybe a private settlement. He knew what was hidden in the egg and thought it made him a partner instead of an employee. Clara Wynne said sharply, keep your voice down. Why? The saints disapprove. Dykes took one step closer. If you have the paper, hand it over. I don't have the paper. Then where is it? With a man who dislikes collectors, dealers, and breathing lies. That was not a bluff, but they had to believe. It was half won. The trick in a room like that is to sound uncertain about everything, except your nerve. Hahn folded his hands loosely in front of him. You have made a mistake, Mr. Goodwin. There was no ring, no conspiracy. At most, understandings, informal accommodations among bidders. Common enough. Common enough to kill over. His gaze stayed on mine. Kima was unstable. And dead. Yes, the word came out so evenly that it chilled the room by a degree. Dykes had temper. Clara had fear. Hahn had control. Wolf had been right. I said, who struck him? No one answered. Then Dykes said, he came back here raving, demanding numbers, accusing everybody. He had been drinking. Clara Wynne said, that isn't true. He turned on her. Be quiet. There it was. The first crack. I moved half a pace sideways, enough to keep all three in view. You opened the gallery for him, Clara. She swallowed. Number he had a key. Hahn looked at her then. The first real movement he had made calmly. Too calmly. No, he said. He did not. The lamp beside the saint cracked then, not by itself but because Dykes, lunging suddenly toward me, knocked the table edge with his hip. The glass trembled. The lamp tipped, struck the floor, and shattered in a burst of light and dark. The room jumped. Clara cried out. Dykes came fast, one hand out for my coat, the other low. I got the flashlight beam in his eyes for a second and stepped aside. He hit the table instead of me, sent a painted bird skidding, and cursed. Behind him, Hahn did not rush. He only bent quick and composed toward the fallen lamp base. That was the proof. The calmest man in the room was reaching for iron. I kicked it first. It slid under the saint panel with a scrape. Dykes wheeled, half blind, and I gave him my shoulder and all my good wishes. He went into the wall hard enough to improve his manners temporarily. Clara backed against the desk, white-faced. Hahn straightened, empty, handed now, and looked at me with an expression almost regretful. You see too much, he said. No, I told him. Just enough. From the front room came the sound I had been wanting for 3 minutes. The outer door opening, then footsteps, then Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins announcing himself in a voice large enough to arrest wallpaper. The rest went quickly after that. Later, back in the office, with midnight flattening into 1 in the morning and Wolf installed behind his desk like judgment in a yellow room, I gave him the names he needed, the admissions I had got, and the one point that mattered most. Hahn, I said. Not the loudest rogue. Dykes has the hands and Clara has the access, but Hahn is the one who stays cool when murder becomes an administrative problem. Wolf nodded. As I told you. Violence is often delegated, but decision rarely is. Mr. Hahn has the true criminal gift, composure. I sat down at last and stretched my legs. Also, he throws terrible parties. Wolf ignored that. The midnight meeting in the shuttered gallery had yielded what we needed. Names, structure, panic, and the shape of the hand behind Kima's death. It had also yielded one cracked lamp and one close enough look at Peter Hahn's temper to make me appreciate daylight. By then the dark end of the case was behind us, or nearly, with Wolf. That means only one thing. The office gathering was coming, and someone was about to learn that calm is no protection at all when Nero Wolfe has finished thinking. Chapter 9. Wolfe closes the drawer at 11 o'clock. The next morning, Nero Wolfe had his office arranged for execution, not literal execution. Wolfe disapproves of unnecessary motion, and hanging people in the office would create disorder. But there are occasions when he gathers men and women under his roof with such precise malice that the atmosphere takes on the quality of a courtroom in which the judge has already read the verdict and is merely waiting for the condemned to catch up. Inspector Kramer arrived first, broad, red-haired, suspicious, and visibly unhappy at having been summoned instead of consulted. He took the red leather chair nearest my desk and glared at Wolfe, as if he had come prepared to arrest either the detective or the furniture, depending on which annoyed him first. "This better be good," he said. Wolfe, behind his desk, adjusted one sheet of paper by perhaps a quarter of an inch. "Good is an aesthetic category, Mr. Kramer. I offer utility." Pearlie Stebbins came in behind him and took a chair by the wall with his notebook ready, and his face set for trouble. Then the others arrived in the order I had arranged for them. Julius Tappan, looking as if he regretted every painted object he had ever bought. Leonora Brundage, in black silk and upright indignation. Clara Wynne, pale and composed by force. Andrew Dykes with his careful hands resting too flat on his knees. And Peter Hahn, smooth, blonde, and serene enough to make me want to check whether he had been manufactured. When they were seated, Wolfe let silence settle. He knows the value of silence. It makes the innocent uncomfortable and the guilty inventive. At length, he said, "You are here because Saul Keema was murdered, because a painted wooden egg has behaved with more significance than dignity, and because several of you have been collaborating in a criminal scheme both vulgar and profitable. Mr. Kramer is present so that when I finish, arrests may interrupt conversation." Kramer growled, "Start with the murder." "Number, I will start where the murder started. With the drawer." That got them. Tappan blinked. Clara Wynne lowered her eyes. Hahn did not move at all. Wolfe placed the two halves of the egg on the blotter before him, then the typed copy of the coded strip. Mr. Tappan came to me believing this object repeatedly returned to the top right drawer of his bureau by means either supernatural or obscure. The truth was simpler. It returned because someone kept returning it. The drawer was not cursed, it was convenient. He turned his head toward Tappan. "You live in a well-run house, servants, deliveries, restorers, auction porters, gallery messengers, men from storage firms, all are admitted according to routine. In such a house, a small object may be placed where it belongs without provoking inquiry. That drawer served as a blind return point, a mailbox, if you prefer the vulgar term." Tappan swallowed. "My God! Yes," Wolfe said dryly, "though not in the theological sense. You mistook a criminal delivery system for the eccentric behavior of an object because you had already decided the object was special. Vanity often assists crime." Tappan flushed. Brundage made a small sound that might have been agreement or contempt. Wolfe continued. "Inside the egg was concealed a strip of paper, bearing lot numbers, initials, and figures. Mr. Goodwin and I have compared those entries with recent auction records. They are secret bidding limits, ceilings set in advance for a ring of conspirators. One member was assigned a lot, the others provided token opposition only. Thus prices were suppressed, estates cheated, and desirable objects passed cheaply into the hands of the ring until they could be resold to the proper collector at a proper profit." Kramer leaned forward, rigging bids. "Precisely." Pearlie's pencil moved. Wolfe lifted the typed sheet. "The initials correspond to those in this room and to one dead man. SK for Saul Keema, PH for Peter Hahn, Del B for Leonora Brundage, AD for Andrew Dykes, CW, in all likelihood, for Clara Wynne." Brundage stiffened. "This is outrageous." Wolfe nodded. "Undoubtedly, truth often is." Clara Wynne spoke without raising her head. "I never bid publicly." "Number your roll," was quieter. "A gallery manager is useful to such a conspiracy. You knew consignments in advance, could direct private viewings, and could facilitate access. Whether you profited directly or merely yielded under pressure remains to be seen, but your usefulness is not in doubt. Dykes shifted in his chair. You can't prove any of that from a slip of figures. Wolf turned to him. No, single fact proves much. A structure of facts proves a great deal. Your presence at relevant previews, your skill with old paint, the recent touch, up on the egg to conceal the seam, your movements, your attempt last night to recover the object by force. Do not overestimate ambiguity, Mr. Dykes. It is a wasting asset. Dykes' jaw tightened. Wolf placed a fingertip on the egg. Mr. Tappan disrupted the ring when he bought this object unintentionally as part of a miscellaneous lot at the Beecham sale. He removed not merely an item but the record of agreed ceilings. The conspirators needed it back. Since the drawer in his bureau had already served as a secure deposit point, the egg was quietly restored there after each time he carried it away. Mr. Tappan imagined recurrence. The ring required continuity. Cramer looked at Tappan. You never thought maybe somebody was using your house? Tappan said bitterly. I think that now. Too late, Wolf said, as is usual. He shifted his gaze to the others. Saul Keema, however, had become dissatisfied. The coded sheet shows increasing irregularity beside his initials, altered figures, supplemental marks. He had begun pressing for a larger share of the profits. Perhaps because he did much of the field acquisition, perhaps because he knew where the true record was kept. In any case, he was no longer a cooperative rogue. He had become an anxious and greedy one, which is the least stable variety. Hahn said pleasantly, You are offering a lively theory, Mr. Wolf. Wolf looked at him. I have not yet reached the part that concerns you most. Restrain your compliments. A faint color touched Hahn's cheeks and vanished. Wolf went on. Keema's greed did not kill him by itself. Men quarrel over money daily and survive to cheat again. What killed him was panic. He threatened to keep the egg when he could next recover it and to sell the secret inside, the record of collusive ceilings, to a competing dealer. With that information, a rival could expose past frauds, interfere in future sales, or extort everyone involved. In short, Keema threatened to convert a private conspiracy into public leverage. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You got that where? From reason, from the movements of the parties, and from what occurred last night in the Caro Gallery when Mr. Goodwin, at my instruction, hinted that he had seen more than he ought. Hahn said, still pleasantly, Goodwin is capable of hinting at almost anything. That is one of his few merits, Wolf said. He met Mr. Hahn, Miss Wynne, and Mr. Dykes in the gallery after midnight. Mr. Goodwin referred to the strip of figures, to Keema's dissatisfaction, and to the danger of exposure. Mr. Dykes demanded the paper. Miss Wynne contradicted his account of Keema's access to the gallery, and Mr. Hahn, who had remained admirably calm throughout, betrayed himself not by speech, but by conduct. I said. He reached for the iron lamp base when Dykes lunged. Same kind of move, as the weather. Vain support that killed Keema. Fast, neat, no wasted emotion. Kramer looked at Hahn. Did he? Hahn shrugged. Goodwin is dramatic. No, Wolf said. He is irritating. Drama belongs to others. Mr. Hahn is the calmest rogue in the room, which is why he is the murderer. Keema went to the gallery after hours searching for the egg or for another concealed record. He may have had a key or been admitted. He confronted the person best able to assess the danger of his threat. Not Dykes, who is useful muscle and surface skill. Not Miss Wynne, who is frightened and compromised. You, Mr. Hahn, you manage clients, margins, and risk. When Keema threatened to keep the egg and sell its secret to a competing dealer, you acted. Hahn smiled. That is a leap. Wolf shook his head. It is a staircase. Keema was struck once efficiently, with an iron support from the gallery, no wild struggle, no dealer's rage. A controlled blow delivered by a man who had already decided that Saul Keema's continued breathing was bad arithmetic. Last night when Mr. Goodwin mentioned the paper, Dykes lunged in temper. You moved for the iron with composure. There is the distinction. Violence may be delegated. Decision is not. Clara Wynne lifted her head. Her face had gone from pale to white. He did kill Saul. The room changed. Hahn turned to her slowly. Clara. Her voice shook once and then steadied. Saul came back. He said he was finished taking crumbs. He said he knew where the record had been kept, and that if he did not get what he wanted, he would take it to Levinson in Boston. He said all of us could burn. Peter told him to sit down and stop shouting. Saul laughed at him. Then Peter picked up the stand. Dyke swore under his breath. Hahn did not move. Kramer was already on his feet. That enough for you? It is a beginning, Wolf said. Hahn's smile had gone. He sat very straight, hands on the chair arms. She is lying to save herself. Of course, Wolf said. Everyone here would like to save himself or herself. That is why corroboration is pleasant. Miss Wynn's statement fits the physical evidence, the motive, the timing, and your performance last night. Mr. Dykes can add to it if he wishes to bargain. Mr. Hahn, you may continue being calm. It is now only a style. Kramer moved around the desk with Pearlie at his shoulder. Dykes burst out. I didn't touch Kima. Peter told me to clean up and keep Clara quiet. That's all. There, Wolf said. Administrative assistance after the fact. Thank you. Kramer reached Hahn. Get up. For the first time, Peter Hahn hesitated. It was very slight, but I saw it, and so did Wolf. The calm was still there, but now it had something behind it. The little void that opens when a man discovers his best quality has stopped helping him. He rose. Kramer said, You're under arrest for the murder of Saul Kima. Hahn looked at Wolf. You make a great deal out of a painted toy. Wolf settled back in his chair. No, sir. I make a great deal out of stupidity, because it is so often expensive. You and your associates built a ring behind the hammer, hid your numbers in a folk. Art Egg used a gentleman's bureau drawer as a return point, and then killed a partner when he threatened to sell the secret to a competitor. It was ingenious enough to prosper and vulgar enough to fail. Kramer took Hahn's arm. Pearlie moved to Dykes. Clara Wynne sat with both hands clasped in her lap, staring at nothing. Brundage had turned rigid with the injured dignity of a woman who believes fraud is disgraceful chiefly when it is proved. Tappan looked old and disgusted, which for a collector may count as growth. As they were taken out, one by one, Wolf glanced at the egg halves, still lying on the blotter. Well, he said, that matter is closed. I let out the breath I had been keeping for the sake of atmosphere. That closes it then. No, Wolf said. It is merely a fact. But in that room with the case opened, the ring broken, and the murderer led off under Inspector Kramer's hand, it was enough. Chapter 10. Reverence for the wrong things after Inspector Kramer had gone off with Peter Hahn and Andrew Dykes, after Clara Wynne had been taken away to the lesser discomfort of further questions, and after Julius Tappan and Miss Brundage had each departed with a different style of injured silence, the brownstone resumed the kind of quiet it prefers. Not peace. Wolf's house does not deal much in peace. It deals in order, meals, orchids, books, and the occasional collapse of somebody else's arrangement. By 6 o'clock the collapse had been well underway for hours. Outside, West 35th Street had gone to evening. Headlights moved along the wet, dark pavement. Cabs muttered, and the city, having absorbed one more fraud and one more murder, showed no sign of gratitude. Inside, Fritz had sent in coffee and a plate of little cheese biscuits, still warm enough to count as persuasive. Wolf sat behind his desk with his cup in hand, his eyes half closed, and the air of a man willing to let civilization continue, because dinner was only a few hours away. On the blotter lay the two halves of the painted egg. Without its secret, the thing looked almost ridiculous. A shabby little folk, art trifle with tulips, black rings, and a talent for causing trouble above its weight. The seam showed plainly now. Once you know where to look, disguises lose heart. Beside it lay the typed copy of the bidding slip, and beside that a neat memorandum in my hand for the record, since in our business, one does not trust memory when paper will bear the load. Tappan had telephoned an hour earlier. He had done it in the tone of a man asking whether a surgeon might restore the original shape of his life by Tuesday. His reputation, he said, would suffer if word got out that his house had been used as a criminal drop. His collection would be the talk of auction rooms. His bureau, which had belonged to his mother's family, now seemed to him intolerable. Could it be removed? Could the egg be returned eventually? Could Mr. Wolfe suggest how such matters were handled discreetly? Wolfe had listened, grunted twice, and told him, "What you require is not discretion, but humility. Try to acquire some. It is cheaper than furniture." Then he had hung up. I said, "You were hard on him." Wolfe opened one eye. I was exact. He is allowed to mind his reputation. New York is full of people who survive on less. He may mind it all he pleases. He may also reflect that if he had employed his intelligence half as diligently as he employed his acquisitiveness, Saul Keema might still be alive. That is rough. It is accurate. Accuracy often abrades. I let that pass and looked again at the egg. He sounded genuinely wounded. Of course he is wounded. His vanity has been handled without gloves. His bureau is disgraced, his household routines exposed, and his treasure reduced from mystic curiosity to exhibit. It is painful to discover that what one has revered was merely useful to criminals. There was the center of it, and because it was the center, Wolfe saw it first and said it best. Collectors, in Wolfe's view, rank somewhere below healthy orchids and somewhere above politicians, but only on alternate days. He distrusts the whole species. I have heard him call collecting organized sentimentality, acquisitive nostalgia, and the refuge of people who prefer dead objects, because the living resist arrangement. Usually he says those things when a collector is not paying his fee. This time he had more ground than usual. I said, he believed the egg was special before it had earned the right. Wolfe nodded. Precisely that is why he was vulnerable. Collectors are easy prey because they already believe certain objects deserve reverence. One need only place a little mystery around a thing, and the collector himself supplies the incense. I grinned. That is good. I know it. He sipped coffee. Mr. Tappan did not merely own the egg. He granted it significance. When it returned to his drawer, he interpreted recurrence as destiny instead of delivery. He preferred romance to trespass, because romance flatters the owner. It suggests the object has chosen him, whereas trespass suggests he has been a fool. Yes, people resist the explanation that insults them. That ought to have gone in a handbook, if we had kept one. I crossed to the window and looked down at the street. The city was in one of its evening moods, brisk and damp and full of anonymous purposes. Somewhere downtown clerks were locking up. Somewhere uptown a collector was telling a careful half-truth over cocktails. Somewhere in a police room, Peter Hahn was discovering that calm is less ornamental when there is a stenographer present. "Behind me," Wolfe said. "Archie." "Yes." "Destroy the remaining notes that identify the bureau drawer specifically." I turned. Feeling charitable, number feeling practical. There is no reason for posterity to know which drawer, only that a drawer existed. Mr. Tappan has already suffered enough, and I dislike feeding gossip when facts have had their meal. That was one of Wolfe's occasional excursions into mercy, though he would deny the term, and perhaps bite for using it. I took the notes, crossed to the wastebasket, thought better of that, and carried them instead to the fire tray by the Globe. One match did it. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into little grey scales. When I came back, Wolfe was looking at the egg again. "Shall I lock it up?" I asked. "For the present. Kramer may want it again, though I hope not. It offends me." I picked up the two halves. The wood was light in the hand, almost cheap. It was hard to believe that such a trifle had carried a secret system through salesrooms and private galleries, had gone in and out of houses like a silent courier, had helped rig prices, frighten conspirators, and finally bring one of them to murder. But that is another thing about our trade. Size is decorative. Function is what counts. The whole thing, I said, ran on little doors. Wolfe's brows moved. Meaning? The egg seam, the bureau drawer, the gallery desk drawer, hidden spaces behind saints, Everyone using compartments because compartments look innocent. Wolf settled deeper in his chair. Yes, that is often how the dark enters. Not through broken locks. Through polished little doors people are proud to leave open. I looked at him. You had that ready too. I did not. I merely think faster than you. That was rude, which restored the natural order. Fritz came in then to announce dinner in the tone of a man rescuing two inferior minds from abstraction. We went to the dining room. Fritz had done roast duck with a sauce that made me forgive the world several of its offenses. Wolf gave it the whole attention it deserved. We did not discuss murder over the soup, because Wolf considers that barbaric, and after years in his employ I had learned to postpone even excellent observations until the right course. Not until coffee in the office again did he resume. Mr. Hahn, he said, was in one sense the least interesting member of the ring. That is not how it looked when he reached for the iron. Number, but until then he had disguised himself as function. Kima was noisy greed, Dyke's useful skill, Miss Brundage acquisitive vanity, Miss Wynne compromised access. Hahn was management. Such men are always dangerous. They make vice seem administrative. That sounds like another line for the handbook. There is no handbook. There ought to be. Chapter 1. Never trust a painted egg. Wolf snorted. I took out my notebook and put down the last items for the file. The arrests, Clara Wynne's statement, Kramer's promise to pursue the auction fraud angles with a zeal sharpened by annoyance, and the matter of Tappan's anonymity such as it might be preserved. Then I closed the book. Well, I said, that's that. Wolf glanced at the cabinet where I had locked the egg. Number, that is never that. There will be indictments, lawyers, bargains, denials, and a month of auction people discovering sudden lapses of memory. But the essential business is done. Which is your favorite part? It is the only part worthy of respect. I sat back and let the room settle around us. The yellow walls, the books, the globe lamp, the old desk, the brownstone itself holding its shape against the city. On jobs like that one, when the last lie has been cornered and the last mechanism exposed, there is a kind of satisfaction that has nothing to do with triumph and very little to do with justice. It is simpler than that. The pieces stop pretending not to belong together. Julius Tappan would go on collecting, though perhaps with a little less reverence and a little more suspicion. His bureau would either be kept as an object lesson or banished to Connecticut. The painted egg would never again look magical to anybody who knew its history. Peter Hahn would have time to admire his own calm in a cell, and Wolf, who had no patience for sentiment when it wore a false mustache, had once more proved that mystery rarely enters by battering down the door. Usually it is invited, on West 35th Street that night, with the case closed and the house steady around us. That seemed the only ending worth having.